So fashionably on time. I'm so proud of my timekeeping today, not that you can guess. But we're moving into the last formal part of this afternoon's proceedings, which is our panel debate, which is very much focused about creating the digital future that we want. And so just remember the journey that we've been on today. So this morning was about inspiration, the 12 and then 12 different presentations this morning, giving us different insights into what that future could be like, both from the perspective of digital manufacturing ecosystem, the future of the economy, and the future of work. After we heard the general context from Tam and Chris, then Sean very ably condensed many of those insights into perhaps some of the coherent considerations that we may need to consider. And then you guys did a fantastic job reflecting on that collectively and co-creating your storyboards and coming up with your critical questions. So what I'm going to do now is just ask each of the panel members to give a very brief introduction to themselves, and then we'll ask each of the tables in turn to post their question to the panel. I'm not presuming that every panel member will answer every question. What I think we should perhaps do is start with one panel member who wants to lead on that question and maybe with another following up. But this isn't rehearsed, so we've got no set order. And so it's going to be a co-created production. That's probably the best way. Yeah. So maybe we start here. You know Katy, but just a quick recap, Katy.
Yeah, hi, Katy Davies, Managing Director of CamdenBoss, a medium-sized manufacturer from Suffolk.
Troy Barratt, MD of BAMUK Group. We own Contracts Engineering, one of the Southeast's largest contract manufacturers, where we only make companies' products, and Furnitubes, a manufacturer and designer of street furniture and light infrastructure products.
Thank you. I'm still Chris Courtney. I'm the Challenge Director for Made Smarter Innovation, which is the overall national innovation program that supports this, amongst other things.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Claire Porter. I head up the manufacturing policy team in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. That's called today, anyway. I guess, what do I say about me? In terms of links to Made Smarter, I was the lead official on the Made Smarter review, so worked on that in 2017, and my team oversees the programme as a whole.
Hello everyone, my name is Fhaheen. I'm a senior economist at Make UK. We're the trade association that represents UK manufacturing in government.
Great. You can just hold on to that for now. So I am going to start over here, and with this table, like to pose their question to the panel.
How does digital manufacturing look like in 2040 to be widely circular and waste-free?
Actually, I think this is one you could all have a view on, so I don't know who wants to go first.
I'm happy to start with a brief view. So digital manufacturing, I think we have to be very clear about the definition. We know it's digitalization versus digitization, which is converting old analog numbers into digital. Manufacturing is an industry that has been digitalizing quite fast. From our own surveys, we know that manufacturing has been actually progressing and transitioning to a more digitalized industry over the last decade or so. It's very hard to look in 2040, but being an economist, I think it's my job to actually predict the future and usually be wrong about it. But I think it's important to understand that the lines between where digital fits in all other aspects of investment, such as skills, such as investment in physical capital, is blurring quite closely because digital has a significant role to play in ensuring efficiency in all parts of the business. I don't think we're ever going to move away from being digital into a metaverse-type manufacturing industry because that's not possible. But I do think that from what we're seeing now, manufacturing is continuously investing and moving forward towards reducing waste, becoming more efficient, and digital products are a key part of that transition. And I think in 2040, we'll maximize that.
Okay, great.
I suppose a sort of reflection, really. I mean, it's only 18 years away, right? If I look back to some of the predictions 18 years ago, or even if you look back to the Foresight Future of Manufacturing report, which is 2013, 2014, has a lot changed in some areas? Yeah, I think it really has. I think for 2040, I think some of the sad realities is that some of the acceleration of digitalisation we've seen in the UK has unfortunately been as a result of real challenges that the country's faced over the last couple of years. So COVID, obviously out of necessity, more manufacturers moving to digitalisation. I think challenges in terms of access to labour is also another driver towards digitalisation and uptake of technology. Current supply chain disruptions. I think those are the things that are really starting to push manufacturers at an accelerated pace. I'm really hoping, on a more positive, that in terms of circular economy, there is a more of a push from consumers to also kickstart manufacturers to do that. But I suspect it's also going to be driven by necessity in terms of additional costs, challenges of actually accessing new virgin materials and then looking to new methods of manufacture. So I think it will look different. How different, if it's going to be radically different, I'm not quite so sure at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation about the role of consumers, because if you actually think about it, all supply chains start with us as consumers. I often say, hands up if you buy fair trade coffee. But imagine if you went into the supermarket and picked up the non-fair trade coffee and a big siren went off that sort of says, look at you, you've not bought the fair trade coffee. We might begin to nudge a change in behaviour, and you could see it with, the likes of Starbucks not paying tax, and then there's a bit of an outcry and maybe they start to pay a bit of tax, that perhaps, as Claire says, we as consumers might be able to kickstart this a bit. But then consumers have to have the purchasing power to be able to do that. So how can we get things cheap enough that everybody can make that choice and not just those that are paying, you don't pay 45% tax anymore, do we?
It has to be global consumers as well.
Yeah.
So because, we export 40%, 48% of our stuff. So I think, it's just recognising that's got to be a global movement.
Absolutely. Chris?
I'm just trying to assemble my thoughts into something coherent to say. I think, so my start point is, if you take a circular economy and a fully circular economy, and all the things that need to happen in order to enable that is an enormously broad range of things. So you need to look at incentives, you need to look at where investments is, you need to look at skills, you need to look at business models, all of that stuff needs to happen. So currently in many industries, there is a degree of circularity, there is a degree of recycling and reuse of materials. What we're just talking about is that becoming much, much more widespread across a range of materials that are typically not seen as high value enough to be recycled and reused, or are not seen as so scarce as you have to do that. So it's really quite a big transformation that needs to happen. So it's easier and cheaper often for people to throw stuff away and use virgin material for some product areas and product types, and that needs to change. Those incentives need to change. The business models around it need to change. So I think it's actually quite a broad range of things that need to happen. And I think that is going to be a big part of the future. So we all sit with mobile phones in our pocket, but we don't know how to recover the precious metals from them. There's an enormous amount of waste in textiles and fashion industries and so on. So you can go around all the different industries and see the problems, but I think it's actually a broad range of things that would need to happen. And in truth, they need to see some progress now, and it's about accelerating progress, because some of it does exist. There are business models like this. There are companies already doing it. It's a matter of how do you accelerate that and make more of it happen so it happens at scale by 2040, I think.
I think that's a really good point, particularly just talking to mobile phones and hooking that into what Claire just said. Mobile phones are one of the things that we do tend to keep in a higher value state and actually do go on to secondary markets. And I suppose that's one of the other things to consider, that actually servitised products, where you perhaps pay a little more frequently, actually can help with levelling up, because they make things affordable for everybody and not just those that can afford a high cash outlay. So they have potentially more global solutions.
Yeah, so just one example of consumer pressure, because just to confess, I'm looking at getting an electric car. In the marketing for most of those, they now talk about those being delivered in a net zero supply chain, like on a TV ad during the football or something. So they think it's important enough to consumers to tell them the whole thing is net zero. So that's basically recognition from those companies of the importance of the consumer awareness of their sustainability agenda, if you like. And I think we'll see that across more and more products.
Okay, great. Troy?
Thank you. I'll make a few points. One, I always like to think of manufacturing as we move atoms, not electrons. So when it comes to circularity and reusability, manufacturing has to be very, very engaged, as opposed to, say, software services businesses. In terms of nudging, I think I'll be a bit maybe controversial here, but I think it's kind of a head fake to keep focusing on consumers and what we buy. I mean, if you look at that building over there behind the Royal Festival Hall, if everyone takes a look, That's probably several 100,000 tons of concrete, steel, and glass. What happens with that building is way more important than nudging a few of us to buy one thing or another. Or if you look at all the cars on that bridge over there, what's way more important is what happened to those cars when they're done, and how were they reused more than any single decision we make. And I think our governments are starting to wake up to that fact, rather than saying, buy this, or you can pay an extra 3% on your energy bill to have renewable, when you're going to get renewable anyways if it's coming off of a solar wind farm, an offshore wind farm or solar panels. So I would say, in my last point, I would say I'm 100% behind it. I think we need real government policy. I think a carbon tax is coming. The EU is putting one in place. I hope we join the EU in that and putting a carbon tax in place, because I'll tell you right now, as a manufacturer, I 100% buy it, but my business will go under if I have to compete against countries that import that don't have the same tariffs that I have and pay the same taxes that my company has. So I won't do it. So I hope governments address that.
Excuse me, thank you. So I guess just focusing on the kind of digital bit in the question, I guess for me, it's almost like how can digital solutions help us get there, or get to a point where we are more circular by 2040? I think certainly, from our perspective, we've got a heck of a lot to learn and make sure that we properly learn about our supply chains and where things go. And I'm really hoping that digital solutions can really help to unlock that, or at least hand down tools, again, coming from an SME standpoint, give us kind of readily accessible tools to just demystify it and just get us started. Because I think that first leap is the difficult bit. So that's certainly where I'd like to see the digital bit coming into play.
Great. I hope that answered your question. Table at the back.
So our question is, what is the pathway into the future of manufacturing, especially including the inclusive part? Inclusive manufacturing part.
Okay, I don't feel manufacturing is very exclusive. We'll take anyone that will work hard. So I would say the inclusive thing, I don't see it as an issue. And as far as the future of it, I'd go back to the point I made, it needs to be invested in. We don't need government support, we just need to focus on investing in new technologies and training our teams.
So maybe just unpack the two bits of the question. I think the future of manufacturing, in order to really optimize it, needs to be diverse and inclusive. We need to harness all the talents we've got from wherever they come. So I think that there is a diversity and inclusion issue in some areas of manufacturing. You just have to look at the stats, right? Just go and look at the numbers that's there. And that's a missed opportunity for manufacturing to really bring in all the talents and harness all of that potential within the UK. And I include engaging with the social sciences as opposed to the physical sciences, right, in this program. So I think that there is, that's one of the pathways to optimize the future of manufacturing, is to increase its diversity and inclusion. That's why you do it. You want better outcomes, not just for the people who work there, but for all of us. And I think that is a critical component of it. In terms of, I don't think there is a single pathway. If I knew the plan, I would tell you, and then we'd all be working to it, well, at least within this program. I think there's a multitude of pathways, but having a long-term consistent plan, being really sort of passionate about entrepreneurship, innovation, skills, and so on, trying to create good foundations that create the best possible conditions for success for the future of manufacturing is the best thing we can do. I don't know exactly what we're going to be making in 2040 in the world at all, let alone in the UK. So I can't say, back everything to do with hydrogen or back everything to do with some other mode of transport. What we can do, is, our broader sense, is create the environment for people to be successful within manufacturing and those businesses to thrive in the UK.
Thanks, Chris. I agree with everything Chris has said, so I won't duplicate that. Just to sort of give a flavour of those figures, though. In automotive, it's 12% female in manufacturing. So, and with 90,000 vacancies within UK manufacturing, it doesn't take someone a lot smarter to sort of work out that you've got to be fishing from a bigger pool to be able to fill those gaps. I think one of the observations I'll have is that, and I don't disagree at all with trying to get more young people. If we're looking at young people as a demographic into STEM education, I think that's really absolutely the way we should go. However, as opposed to echo Chris's point, I think we've also got to be less snobbish about pathways into manufacturing careers, because if I think about some of the manufacturers that I've been fortunate fortunate enough to visit around the UK and some of the smaller companies, I suppose to speak to Troy's point, that they are taking anyone in a positive way, as in we welcome people who weren't great at maths or science in school. We welcome people of all backgrounds, and actually we want them in, we want them to be enthused, we want to then lead them on a career so they can progress through the company or move on. So I think we do need to really rethink that in order to attract others into manufacturing. And also, and I know that's easier said than done, given that other sectors also have challenges attracting data analysts, attracting some of the sort of young people or other people we want from those sorts of creative, digital type careers that we want more of manufacturing. So it's not easy, but I do think that we need to rethink pathways into manufacturing and open them up.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything my peers have said. I mean, manufacturing at the moment, given that the shortage of not just skills but also physical labor is quite a dire situation, that manufacturers are struggling to fill those jobs. But I think from digital manufacturing's point of view, it can play a massive role in enabling people to actually work in manufacturings without even being in the factory in some cases. Of course, there's a difference between production staff and non-production staff, but some of those kind of digital skills that we're looking at, like programming, like computer skills, can also allow access to like disabled workers to have an opportunity in manufacturing, which maybe historically may have not been as easy. But there are other external challenges that we do need to think about, such as labor mobility and access to actually physical location. Manufacturers are based all across the UK. And talking specific about ED&I, it's not necessarily that easy to come up with a number on what looks like the perfect EDI situation for employment, but we have to think about housing as well. We have members even at Make UK who have said that they have not been able to fill jobs because they have found a candidate that lives 70 miles away, but they can't move near enough to that location because there are no houses available. So there are plenty of issues that we need to solve in this particular area, but I think it's something that manufacturers are super open and welcome. I mean, we have our own apprenticeship training center. We have awards for like some of the best apprentices in the UK, almost exclusively, pretty much every single year. The best apprentice engineer is always a woman. So I think that's quite telling that there's a huge market and opportunity for diversity here in that particular area, and I think manufacturers are aware of that.
Great. Katy, do you have anything to add?
Thank you. I think for me it comes down to just, again, it being incumbent on manufacturers to really shout about what we do. So again, we're really lucky. We're 49% female, which is crazy for a manufacturer. We've done nothing to encourage that. Fair enough, having a female MD, maybe candidates felt more prepared to apply knowing that there was a female MD, they might have felt more comfortable. But actually getting out there that you do have a people strategy that does place people at the heart of it and that you are welcome, whatever background you have, whether you're neurodiverse, there is a role for you, and manufacturing is wildly more accessible than people think. But I think it's all of us pushing that water uphill and really starting to get that message out there that it isn't the sort of dusty 1970s kind of, dirty environment that people kind of think it is.
Can I just add something? Yeah, I mean, just to link the two questions slightly. So the 2040 timeframe, if you think about that, is 18 years away. That's not going to be fixed by getting more girls into STEM now. It's a good thing to do, but it's not. So we have to influence change now and think about everybody in the room is probably in a position of influence, somebody in the company and the organization. If you want to affect the change that we're talking about, transform manufacturing the way you're saying, it's not sufficient to say we need to do more of this stuff in schools, because somebody going through the school system now, like my sons will be, they'll probably be in their early 30s by the time we're talking about 2040. And they won't be in a position to have the impact that most of the people in the room will have had by then. So I do think there's an urgency and a recognition of the influence that we all have as well.
So I spoke to a very interesting lady earlier. Sorry, I can't remember your name. Yes, you. Gemma. So here's a question for you all. So I just want you all to close your eyes for a moment and imagine a robot. Okay, you can open your eyes now. I want you to put your hands up if you think that robot's male. I want you to put your hand up if you think the robot's female. And I want you to put your hand up if you really think I've gone crazy and you've got no idea what gender the robot is. Because actually, do you just want to explain, could someone give Gemma do you want to explain a little bit about your background?
Sure.
Hello, everyone. I'm kind of here under false pretenses.
No, you're exactly the sort of person that we wanted to get here.
I'm a PhD student at Loughborough, and I am exploring the gendered aesthetics of robots, particularly as far as stereotypes are concerned, how that affects the way we view them, how that encourages interaction or lack of interaction. And I find it really interesting that a lot of engineers don't think that robots are gendered. Most people who aren't engineers think robots are gendered.
And Gemma, could you just tell people your background?
Yeah, I'm actually a costume designer and creator. I've worked for 30 years in the film and television industry, and I'm particularly interested in semiotics and how we view things, interact with things, just from a visual perspective.
So there we go. That could be part of the answer. And we've got Gemma here today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So actually, would your table like to pose your question?
What is it that we will value in 15 years' time that we don't value today? Good luck with this one.
Can I be really shameless? So I'm going to totally steal Kim's answer because we were talking about this in the coffee break and she came out with an absolute gem. Am I okay to shamelessly steal your answer? So it was brilliant. I'm going to poorly express it, so do jump in. But effectively, I think what Kim was getting at, that the long term is what Kim was hoping that we would value in 15 years' time that we don't value now. We know we all do it. If there's a short-term gain to be had, it's too tempting, isn't it? But actually, by 2040, it would be lovely to have to be in a place where you're not necessarily just chasing that short-term goal and you are actually invested in the long-term impacts of what you're thinking about. So I thought that was brilliant. I hope you don't mind me stealing it, but all credit to you.
I mean, I think people value it now, but I'll probably say the obvious, just a clean, healthy environment. I think it is very aware now, and most people are very aware of it, but I think by 2040, there'll be more reasons for us to care a lot more about it.
I don't have a good answer, so I'm going to go for creativity. I think that thing around creativity and entrepreneurship, I think is something that's really important to keep alive as we sort of think that computers can crunch the numbers on everything, we can analyze everything. That creative spark and innovative spark that we need to create and also be able to do that collaboratively like we've done today, I think is something that we should cherish and keep alive.
I did think about this. I mean, I think it's probably a similar theme actually about linked to the long-term aspect, because I thought, well, this is probably going to be too late if we only care about it in 15 years, right? But if I think about the stuff that recent years has shown us, it's the resilience to key things that we really value and really importantly need. So yes, clean systems, clean air, but actually energy, food and drink, because actually, let's face it, I mean, it's the biggest manufacturing sector in the UK, but very little known, but actually we'll all know about it if we run out of food and drink, right? And healthcare. So I just think recognising and maybe being able to build up more UK manufacturing capability to be able to service those so that we're not so dependent on other countries supplying that in time of need. I'd add in defence as well, but that always feels really awful and scary, but it's true, right? So I think being with that view in terms of longer term, having a really clear plan about resilience and the things we absolutely need. I mean, you can add semiconductors into that, but that's huge, other can of worms, right? So, yeah, that's what I think.
I think all the good ones have been taken. So I think despite how quickly the industry is automizing, digitalizing, and there may be a view that people aren't going to be the subject of focus 18 years from now or 15 years from now, I still think that people and skills are going to still be the number one focus for manufacturers even in 2040. And so we need to ensure that we don't forget that despite the industry is evolving continuously, the issues that we face today, the challenges that businesses are trying to deal with right now, those are still going to be the focuses because that's what manufacturers need to continue operating. It's just, it may look a little bit different. It may be the skills that we need look a little bit different, but it's still going to be skills.
Yeah. I feel that I've got to comment on this one. So 15 years' time, I would hope that we value how to be idle. And the reason why I put it in those terms is there's a very good book written by, I think his name's Tom Hodgkinson, who was a Guardian journalist, who spoke about, he wrote a book called How to be Idle. And essentially what it talks about, it's really the cycle that we're in our current in our previous industrial evolution, which is consumption-driven economic growth, which is essentially what we've had for the last 200 years. And the problem with consumption-driven economic growth is that in order to have more stuff, you've got to work harder. You strive for that building over there, more grass and concrete, or those cars over there. But actually, if you strive to be idle, then essentially you only have to work enough to give yourself the basic stuff that you need. So therefore, you don't need a car because you could cycle, because you just find a job close to your house. You don't need gym membership because you're growing your own vegetables and you're getting a good workout. You don't need money for new clothes because you might be a costume designer, but if not, you can mend them, and actually we don't necessarily value fashion or things in the same way. And so maybe if you just summarise all that down, perhaps what we're going to value in 15 years' time is simplicity. Because actually, by making so much variety in stuff, we create complexity, and that's what messes everything up. There you go. I think I must have had something interesting in my tea in the break. This table. Would you like to pose your question to the panel?
Yes, we were thinking about the competencies, individual competencies within the companies, and which was stimulated by the conversation about the old boy and the young apprentice over the CNC table. So, do you think we need to move beyond the INT model, competence model, in order to improve productivity in UK manufacturing? Does it need to be reframed?
So the I being that within an organisation you've got people that are very siloed, so like an expert in one thing. T-shaped people are perhaps more your sort of general manager that can reach across functions, but still they're perhaps a manufacturer reaching across procurement and logistics. So, and if Richard Wilding was here, he'd do a really good version of an I or T-shaped person, but he's not, so I've just done it for him. So their question is about, do we need something beyond ILT? And in Sean's post-lunch keynote, he talked about X-shaped people that perhaps could connect across into tangential industries. So this is, for instance, finance supporting supply chains, or insurance, and so on and so forth.
I'm not necessarily all that familiar with that type of language, but I think, I understand the concept. Yes, I think some businesses are more siloed and some are more laterally in terms of organizational structure. I think looking forward in terms of improving the kind of flexibility and accessibility of knowledge, yes, I think the kind of the older side of the generation has still a lot to contribute to ensure that the younger workforce has the kind of right motivations and understanding of how to do the job. But in terms of thinking about digital skills, actually we know that younger people are obviously more aware and pick up those skills a little bit faster because they learn some of it in schools and they learn and it's part of the job market, and so we need knowledge to transfer almost the other way. From our own surveys, we understand that even if you have access to the right skills and you have the cash available to invest in digital technologies, what businesses often end up lacking is the actual leadership to organize those two things. And because you often find that is lacking because the people who are in those positions were not focused on developing digital skills when they were in school, because it's a relatively fairly new thing. So I think that there has to be some more flexibility in that. I don't know what the correct answer is, but I think both young and old can learn from each other.
And I think I'm in danger of answering the wrong question because I'm not quite sure I understand that either. It's new to me. But I guess similar to Fhaheen, in terms of if I grasp the concept, I think any organisation, it strikes me not just about manufacturers, there's real risks and lesser good outcomes if you are working in silos, right? And I think all organisations can benefit from having a sort of more of a whole systems approach to its organisational structures and thinking. We know, the big things I guess we focus on through government policy, not getting into the technical aspects of manufacturing individual jobs, but leadership and management is a real challenge within the UK. And actually, being that sort of leaders who can transform, manage change, because let's face it, I mean, digitalisation is very disruptive. So how can you bring people along with you, managers and leaders who are willing to take risks and maybe try new things? Maybe that's even different people within an organisation changing roles. And I'm sort of thinking about our own organisation actually within the department, trying to do things like that. And actually where we see time and time again policy not being as good as it should be and could be is where you haven't connected to your colleagues, be it within the same department or actually in other organisations and departments as well. So I think that's my sort of takeaways is sort of systems approach, greater collaboration and trying to avoid silos with some really great leaders thrown in for measure.
Sounds like Pays.
Maybe just a couple of points. So I think the first thing is, I was in this table discussion, pardon me, so I said all this to the team already. So the first thing is a diversity of people is important. So I've worked in big engineering organizations and you need specialists. You need narrow focused specialists to make progress, but you also need people who can work comfortably in cross-functional teams. So it's not that we need to all convert from I's to X's or we don't value I's anymore, whatever that really means. So I think having the right blend of different skill sets really does matter. The other thing is if you think about the anti-fragility message, combine the lean manufacturing with silos and so on, there's a lot about the systems and how you set them up and how you set up your organization and how it works that defines how people behave. I'm not sure people are intrinsically IT or X themselves. They will function differently in different environments, so you can make some adjustments to it. Some systems, some production systems, some company systems, some decision-making systems are incredibly inflexible and very siloed, and people will operate in that way. So I think it's not just a people thing, although I would say that diversity is usually the answer to it. And trying to find that right blend and try to introduce some of that and setting the framework for that by having leaders who are capable of working cross-functionally. We've all worked in organizations where there isn't necessarily great cross-functional leadership or coordination at a senior level. It's also leadership and management agenda, I think, to kind of really reach across the disciplines and work across a range of different types of people and different functions and to break down those silos as much as possible. And that includes pretty much everybody in the room, I would say.
I'll be fairly brief. I would say, when anyone thinks about where they're going to go in their career, they want to go somewhere attractive. So I would just keep it as simple as possible. An attractive industry, an attractive career, something where there's professional progression, good pay, opportunities for personal growth, and some stability. So right now, do you want to go work for Nissan or Tesla if you're in a car company, right? Or which software company do you want to work for? Do you want to work for Bing search engine or Google's? So I would just say it's about, to use my word from earlier, framing the right discussion. The more attractive areas within manufacturing are, the more people they're going to attract. It'll just be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Thank you. I think a similar point to the one that Chris just made, but moving it on a little bit perhaps, is around just getting everybody to play to their strengths. So where you've got I-shaped people, putting them in a role where they are I-shaped and you're getting the best out of them for that, but getting a blend across your workforce. So probably coming back to the question that we just had about the inclusivity in manufacturing piece. I mean, we just realised that we've done quite a big piece of work around like neurodiverse people and making sure that they're playing to their strengths. But actually we came full circle and went, hang on a minute, we don't do this for people that don't have a recognised kind of neurodivergent. So hang on a minute, and actually that's kind of been our realisation. And again, having those frameworks in place to make sure that is managed and monitored and people have got boundaries if they need them and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think they're back to inclusion again.
I think that's a really good point because different people function in different ways. So as you could tell from earlier, some of my ideas are a bit out the box, but not necessarily all of your bosses appreciate that. I can remember a story at Dyson where I was taken aside. And so bearing in mind, I was, 27, I'd not long been there, I was taken aside. And Janet, I was Janet then. Janet, you're making the MD feel uncomfortable. Okay, how am I making the MD feel uncomfortable? Because when he asks you a question, you know the answer. Surely that's my job to know the answer. Yes, but it makes him feel uncomfortable because he feels he should know the answers. And so when you know it straight away. So could you please, one, when he asks you a question, say to him, oh, that's a good question, can I go away and think about it? Secondly, when you feed back to him, give him 3 options so that he can choose. I can't remember what the third thing was, but it was equally, and I can remember at that point thinking, oh, okay, so this is how I get the best out of this working relationship. So I have a choice. If I want to thrive in this environment, then I can play that as a game. I suppose in one way it was a compliment in a strange way, or I could choose that that's not the sort of place where I wanted to work. So sometimes actually too, it's you recognising as well what is an environment in which I will thrive, where someone recognises my skills too. And don't feel bad if you don't fit in a particular environment. Find an environment where you can thrive. So, on to our next question, which will be this table here.
You guys, is it?
So our question is, how can the government support small businesses to support school education to shape the mindsets needed for technology adoption and the future digital world?
Ooh.
I think it needs a bit of a rethink. I don't know, we're in a really frustrating place right now where getting engagement with our school, it's through no fault of their own at all. Getting them to engage with us as local employers, it's incredibly hard, incredibly hard. Yes, they're incredibly busy, they've got loads going on, but being driven towards university pipelines, and that's how they get bits of funding, and that's how they get support from whoever it is that it's coming from, just makes it really difficult. So we're really lucky. I've got some great examples within my own workforce that I kind of pimp out on a regular basis. I've got a female head of design who's a degree level apprentice, lights up the board in terms of a unicorn, but even getting that engagement because she's going to be there talking about apprenticeships, it's just not as groovy as having somebody come on board and talk about kind of a university pathway. And I'm picking, certainly in our local area, their big risk is around a lack of aspiration, but trying to unpackage that. What is that? So if you've got somebody that ends up doing a finance apprenticeship but becoming a chartered accountant but within a manufacturing firm that hasn't left Mildenhall, where's the aspiration or lack of aspiration within that problem statement? So it's a bit confused and it's a bit difficult. And I think, I'm surrounded by educators, so my parents are educators and my other half works in an FE college, so I see it all the time. But again, I think there's some sort of, reprogramming right from the start of, if somebody's not particularly academic, probably going back to this inclusion point again, if somebody's not an academic, then they must just be practical, so off they go to manufacturing. But that's absolutely not necessarily the case, and it's all a bit confused. That's a really poorly answered question, but it's just big. Yeah, help me try.
I'll be simple and say I just agree. I think there's more focus on technical training would be really useful, but I'm definitely not the best person to answer this because I'm from America.
What do you do there? What do you do there? And is it good? Is it better?
No, it's actually worse because you have to pay a lot more money whether you go technical or university. So I think America has a bigger problem, but it's more easy for companies to pay for the funding themselves. But that's a separate thing.
Do you end up with better people in the workforce?
Oh, wow, I'm not answering that. I don't know. I mean, both sides are very good. Whether it's better or not, I really couldn't comment. I haven't lived in America for 12 years.
Could have just played it safe and said no, or it's better here.
No, he's been in the UK. He's been in the UK too long. It depends.
Yeah. It depends. So I also feel slightly unqualified to give the answer, but let me just give you a couple of personal perspectives. So I recently joined the board of governors of a school in the city where I live. And it's in a sort of mixed background sort of area, so some quite well-off families and then some pretty deprived families. And they are trying to facilitate, because I live in Derby, there's quite a lot of engineering firms around, they're trying to facilitate connections from the school to big companies and SMEs, and it's really difficult. Even when they have people like me who know some people in the industry, it's quite difficult to make the connections directly. I'm not sure in that interaction I see what the government gap is. There's just challenges in making those connections. And actually, to pick on Troy's point slightly, there are certain families, certain communities and certain areas of the city who don't have that ambition for their children. They don't want them to go into manufacturing, and they want them to go into something else. And they don't really have even that level of aspiration for their children. So there's all sorts of quite complicated problems, I think, in terms of doing it. The SMEs who we try to engage with are the sort of classic, we're time-strapped, cash-strapped, we'd like to help, but my God, we don't really have time for some of this. And there's a gap really between what the schools can offer in terms of the readiness of their kids to go into those environments and what the SMEs are ready to take. So I do think there is some gaps and some really sort of difficult challenges to address with it from my own experience of it. What the government answer is, Claire is clearly working on. I'm about to hand the microphone to her, and she might have a brilliant answer. But I do think it's quite an interesting issue, and it's one that personally I've just decided to try, in a really small way, try and do something about, because I can't think of the big answer. I can't. I'm not engaged enough in the area you talked about. I'm going to try and help in my local school and start from there.
Thanks, Chris. God, if I could solve that and I had the magic bullet, we wouldn't have the challenges we've got. I guess attracting young people. I guess because I wasn't part of the discussion, but it's a subject that you could do a whole day on, right, or longer, because I'm not sure I even agree with that is the answer. I mean, what's the problem we're actually trying to solve here? We sort of almost like saying if you make it easier for SME manufacturers to engage with schools, therefore you're going to get more people, young people into manufacturing. I'm not sure we can actually stand by that and say that is absolutely the case, or large manufacturers going into schools. Is there, if people can sort of really point to the clear evidence for that, that's fine. And I'm really open to understanding this more because, in the last 8 years, this has come up in almost like every industry event I've gone to. And actually before that, when I worked in local growth, it was part of the discussion around the LEP table, the Local Enterprise Partnership table. How can we connect more businesses to schools? And that's not just manufacturers, that's all businesses. And I think, what do I think? Is that something that's doable for SME businesses who are, incredibly time poor, may want to engage? So if there is a model that works for them, great. But I think it's an awful lot to put on SMEs to solve the challenge of inspiring young people. I do think in terms of government policy, and obviously I'm not passing the buck here, but in terms of colleagues in Department for Education, what we're looking at, if you look at things like T-levels, for example, so I expect you all know T-levels and more. My first foray into T-levels was actually taking my 17-year-old daughter, 17 today actually, into colleges to decide. She's actually wanting to do engineering. We went to a college that actually was offering T-levels rather than A-levels to look at. It wasn't a particularly great college. They couldn't tell us with any certainty what the placement was going to be like for companies large or small in our area. So from a parental perspective, I was not sold on it. And I think that is a huge issue. So, gosh, I'm in a risk of rambling here. And so I suppose I'd slightly challenge the question about, is that going to fix the problem? I think there's an awful lot more things we can do to encourage more young people into manufacturing than expecting SMEs to come and solve that through engaging with schools.
Thank you, Claire. I think I have some views here that do agree with what my peers are saying and some maybe that are against. I think from your specific question that you guys had there, I don't know if it's necessarily for government to solve this particular issue. I think certainly from an educational, system point of view, we could maybe better inform students or young people exactly what are the benefits and disadvantages of picking certain subjects and careers. But I think that's quite hard to do because often young people themselves, when they're 16, my 16-year-old sister also just finished her GCSEs this year, and I was going through different colleges in London with her trying to find what the right subjects she wants to study, and she just wasn't aware of what was actually out there for her and relevant. But I think, and I'm pointing a little bit of a finger at myself here, I think industry and organizations like Make UK can probably do more in this particular area. We have something that we piloted this year known as National Manufacturing Day in July, where we invited manufacturers to open their doors to allow for one specific day all the different schools and different local authorities to allow students to just have a look around the factories, and businesses themselves had to set up their factories to ensure that it was safe for 14, 15, 13-year-olds, because obviously these are factories with heavy machinery, so you got to make sure that children can actually come in. We think that it was quite successful. We don't know if that's going to lead to these students actually choosing to study STEM subjects, because I think that we still have some barriers to break down there, but it's a starting point, and I think it's something that we don't need to necessarily wait for government to allow us to do this, to try and engage with schools. We can do it ourselves. You can go to your own schools. We, from our own policy team, go to our local schools saying if there are any GCSE students who are interested in policy, we're happy for them to come and shadow us for a week. We do that every single year.
Yeah, I think I just wonder too, whether there's a different way of looking at the curriculum. So Katy spoke earlier about being purpose-driven. Oh no, it was Amy. And if you think about it, Steiner schools, they organise the curriculum differently. They take a topic each term and then all of the subjects contribute to tackling that topic. If we think about some of the big impacts that we need to achieve in the world around net zero, around better well-being, around greater resilience or anti-fragility, whatever we choose to call it, maybe there's a way of not necessarily changing what we teach, but how we teach it, so that they naturally see the purpose. Because actually, do we really want people to work in manufacturing? No, that in itself is only an end to a means. What we perhaps want to do is make sure that everyone in the UK has access to the things that they need at a price that they can afford when they need them. And so maybe it's less about, do we need more jobs in manufacturing? Do we need to engage more with SMEs? And thinking, starting with that theory of change and the impact we want to achieve, and taking that sort of approach more through the curriculum and how we choose to engage, so that people are inspired. Because actually, we don't necessarily, there's not many sad people like me that at age 15 knew that they wanted to spend their life in manufacturing, and actually I've ended up supporting it in a tangential way. Nor do we necessarily want to create, my son's gone and studied English, I'm a failure, Claire, but hey.
The point to make is that, Andy's on this journey and hopefully goes and wants to do aerospace engineering, and a lot can happen in 2 years, right? And there's no guarantee that even if they go on to do engineering, importantly, that will convert into a job in manufacturing. And I think that's the issue. We have more than ever. We've got more young people going into engineering and STEM. We don't have the conversion of those young people going into manufacturing jobs. So I'm not even sure. That's partly why I sort of said, is it getting SMEs into school as early as possible? I'm not sure. Maybe I've misunderstood the question, but I think that's the kind of thing that bothers me. If that's the problem we're fixing, and I'm not sure it is.
Okay, which brings us nicely on to our last question.
Can we, or indeed should we, take the human out of the loop? Just a little abstract.
So a philosophical one to end on. Do you want to just say that one again? Because people's brains need to take that one on board.
We'll take group responsibility for it. Can we, or should we, take the human out of the loop?
I don't think you can, even if you tried, because automation and digitalization, I think I mentioned this earlier before when I thought about what would be still important 15 years from now. People and skills are still going to be one of the most important factors to productivity in manufacturing. Yes, robots can probably do a lot, and I'm sure in 15 years there's a real risk of them taking over the world. But even with digitalization, I think we need to be aware that there are limitations to that, whereas humans' capacity to think, to create, to innovate is almost unlimited in that sense, and that cannot be replaced by machines. So I think what you might find is a reduction of people within that loop, but you will never eliminate the use of people, because they are essentially what creates that loop as well. Philosophical question and philosophical answer, I suppose, yeah.
Gosh, I guess where my mind goes to straight away is the Made Smarter review originally. So when we looked at it, it was one of the issues that ministers at the time put to Jürgen Mayer about, well, surely if we do this, we're going to decimate what had at the time 2.7 million, we've got 2.5 million jobs now, manufacturing jobs. So the review did set out to say, well, no, actually, if you do this, this and this and this, the 4 key planks, you can create up to 175,000 net new jobs within the UK. Obviously, they're not all going to be in, core manufacturing. They would be in some of the digital solutions that, obviously, through Chris's challenge, are creating, and different types of jobs. But I think there is a case that there are some manufacturing jobs, right, that people don't want to do. It's clear that actually that the job market is saying we don't want to do them. So you've got to look to be able to produce without those. So, of course, things like robots for hazardous places and some of the manufacturing tasks that people don't want to do, great. But I think, through the review, we did set out to sort of show that there is a range of other new jobs that you can you can provide in the UK. And hopefully, other countries that I guess are more robot dense than the UK, they have a larger share of manufacturing. They have more jobs. So it is possible to do it.
My short answer was going to be no, and I thought you might want a slightly longer form of that. So I think there are some bits of the loop that you want to take humans out of. And they can be, if you sort of zoom into specific tasks and specific operations, you probably don't want humans doing it. It's either unsafe, or it's not very satisfying, or it's not very cost effective. There's lots of reasons why you might want to automate certain bits of it. If you take a sort of broader view about what is a smart factory or connected supply chain, what does that really look like? It's a combination of systems and people. They're sort of intertwined, and you have to deal with that reality to some extent. So there's no loop that you can just isolate and say this is an entirely autonomous thing. Very, very few things you could say is entirely autonomous and runs alone with robots and machines and so on. You'll increasingly see that being possible, but actually working something that combines the human and the digital, I think, is the right way to look at a lot of these things. Well, it's not just a sort of cobots example, but decisions being taken is a sort of combination of machines and people in most cases, I think. So you'll see that. So I don't think you can, nor should you, unless you're talking about quite specific things where you want to try and, for various reasons, you might want to automate or do with a robot because it's safer or whatever, or cheaper to do. And you'll see increasing numbers of those types of tasks, I think, that can be done in a cost-effective way, that there's good reasons why you don't want people doing it. But we've evolved as a species. We're pretty good at doing lots of things. So on the one hand, it's common to say that the things that go wrong is usually because there are people involved. That's also true of all the things that go right. So and machines don't get everything right first time round. There's no system that I've ever been involved with that you just turn on and it works, despite what the advertising says. So I think there's still a coexistence period, I think, for most things.
All right. If you guys remember earlier, I said manufacturing, we move atoms and services move electrons. The rollout of something new and novel in services is infinitely quicker and basically costs zero. Whereas in manufacturing, you still have to make everything that's going to do this. So as an example, we probably all now experience, well, everyone has a phone, has a smart voice you can talk to. You've got AI software programs writing news articles. So I would say the human out of the loop is happening in services. It's not happening in manufacturing, right? And I think there's a bit of I think that's a really important thing to look at, because if you look at what they're actually doing in software, in terms of the services industry, it's way quicker than anything in manufacturing. Just to give an example, I just pulled some stats earlier. There's around 1.5 billion cars in the world, roughly. And that's cars, buses, trucks, kind of everything. 85% in Asia, Europe, and North America. We make about 80 million cars a year, so that's a 2% replacement rate. And EVs this year are probably going to be around 8 to 9 million. That's assumed they're ramping up very quickly. So that's only a tenth of that. And not all the EVs can even drive themselves. Most of them can't fully drive themselves, right? Some can. So when we think of the human out of the loop in, say, driving, it's decades before it actually happens in a material way, because you're not retrofitting old cars, right? Waymo is not going to retrofit 1 billion cars to drive, right? It'll be new cars. But software will displace service industry. So I would say that is way more important in terms of the human out of the loop than manufacturing.
And the last word to you, Katy.
Last words. I think the loop just changes to cop out slightly. So whether it's a higher value loop, or it's an emergency loop, or it's a maintenance or programming loop, but I think the loop just changes.
I think that's a great point to end. The loop just changes. So can we show our appreciation to our panel? I think I've done wonderfully well at addressing your questions. And you can exit the stage. Thank you.
This way.